Hi everyone, welcome back to another video in the Engaging with Art series. The topic for today is conceptual art, which is a pretty vague sort of topic, but it's something that's been a part of my work for a long time, and so I thought maybe making a video about it would not only help uncover a bit of why I incorporate the idea into what I do, but also just so I could share my thoughts on it as a whole concept within overall artistic practice. This is going to be another skeptical sort of approach where I want to share with you my ideas and my thoughts on what makes conceptual art, what is conceptual art, and not necessarily try to be definitive or overly instructive. This is definitely something less formal and more trying to approach what conceptual art is sort of by going into the peripheries of understanding based on my subjective experience and ideas, if that makes sense, versus being a complete dissection and a very thorough analysis. So to begin, I do want to just offer kind of a loose definition, something that I was sort of thinking through and what comes to mind for me. And I view conceptual art as that which places its end in expressing ideas, even beyond the final art object itself. The main idea there is we're looking at artwork that is more concerned with sharing particular ideas than any other thing. For example, like in spite of technical prowess, or in spite of aesthetic merit, or in spite of emotional connection. So conceptual art is that which is primarily focused on the ideas, messages, themes it's trying to convey. It's important to mention, however, that an artist could be pursuing conceptual art in tandem with one of those other previously mentioned goals. For example, there could be some attempt at aesthetic merit along with conceptual work too, or emotional resonance alongside conceptual work. Like there can be different things, but the main idea is it's about work that is concerned with expressing the ideas and concepts above everything else. That's its primary ends. So when we're considering work that is conceptual, what can we expect to sort of see visually? I think an important thing to remember is it's going to be using visual means to express ideas. So that's going to inform the approach the artist is going to take. That very well could inform the medium the artist is going to use as well. If an artist finds it more fitting to just use objects to try to convey an idea versus, say, painting those objects, the artist will likely just use those actual objects. So it's an interesting thing that sort of brings in the whole question of why even bother picking up a paintbrush in the first place, or why even bother fashioning conventional art in the first place if the message can be conveyed more succinctly with more concrete means. If we are, however, looking at work that is still in a traditional medium, we're going to expect to see that the compositional elements are going to be moving towards that conceptual end. Obviously, the elements are going to be patterned in a way to affect the viewer in order to direct them to the ideas or the ends. I think words can often be in a lot of conceptual art. Like, sometimes things are quite literally stated. And perhaps that's an indicator. Again, not an always. There's never like an always thing with art, but that's maybe a good sort of road sign if you're looking to try to understand whether something is conceptually driven. Sort of what I was getting at earlier, and what I think is really important, is oftentimes there will be a very deliberate foregoing of what we would expect to see conventionally in art when you're looking at conceptual art. Oftentimes there will be a lack, maybe, of the conventional. So you're going to have a lack of, say, paint, drawing tools. You're going to have a lack of the typical conventions you would probably associate with art as a viewer. I guess as a little thought experiment, think to yourself, like, when you think art or fine art, what first comes to mind? Maybe it is really a framed painting, or maybe it really is a sculptural work, So whatever it is naturally for you, your inclination, I would definitely say, remember that that's probably what you're going to not see, that you should prepare yourself to maybe not necessarily see that. And again, it's a weird sort of backwards way of approaching it, but what it can do is it offers you an opportunity to be more prepared to experience that conceptual work. Now, as I've done before, I want to talk about my own work just as a case study and also as an example too. I describe my work as a dance between the emotional and the conceptual. I always find that I need at least some of both in order to truly be authentic to me and my practice. So my work never will be fully conceptual, but my work will also never be fully emotional. For example, if my work is highly, highly conceptual for a particular piece, it still requires an emotional resonance with me and with the viewer in order to really be authentic. And the opposite is true. If I'm producing work that's incredibly emotional, there's still a great degree of it that needs to have the conceptual grounding, to be grounded in the ideas and what I'm actually trying to do. So I guess the best way to describe it is my work is never wholly conceptual, but it's always conceptual at the same time. One aspect of my work is how I produce with great intentionality, and the reason I do that is because I am making decisions and choices that are connected to the genesis of the idea, and I'm wanting to stay faithful to them. So all of my work, whether an entire body of work, a series, or even a particular piece, it sort of becomes this aggregate of choices and buildup of layers over and over conceptually that I am trying to stay true to from the very conception of the piece until its completion. My work then becomes a very, very dense amount of ideas over and over and over, so to speak. This is something that actually really excites me because what it means is, it means the work becomes really dense and it sort of becomes this tapestry where you have all sorts of layers that can grab different people in different ways. And I really hope and I think that over time, when somebody sits with my work, it will reveal different things to them over time as well. Like, if that makes sense, it will sort of unfold as they change, as the viewer changes, as time changes, as things progress. My hope, at least, is that the work gradually can speak to a viewer, that it can speak immediately, it can speak over time staying with a piece and experiencing it, and then it can speak again over time elapsed or different circumstances within a person's life or a different context for that person or that piece, wherever it's being presented. That is something that I really treasure and that I feel is part of my authentic practice. And I think the whole idea for me of wanting to stay true to a piece from its conception through to its final actual production and end is also sort of a natural consequence of it being very conceptual. I just think it's sort of another quality where it very much is being manifested in my mind and very much being thoughtful and methodical. And I think that that's just another sort of hallmark, I guess, you could expect to see from conceptual work, that it's not necessarily what conceptual art truly is, but I think it's just another facet, if you would. And as I mentioned in an earlier point, I really hope describing my work is a good example of how oftentimes you're going to find artists that are producing conceptual work in tandem with another form. In my case, it's the emotional, so I'm seeking that emotional resonance. I'm seeking that balance between emotional and conceptual. So it's not fully conceptual. And again, I think you're going to find that more for most artists. If you seek it out, you will find purely conceptual artists. Like, that is completely a thing. But oftentimes, artists are going to employ utilizing sort of the tenets or ideas of conceptual art in their process, not necessarily doing so wholly or holistically. So as I'm wrapping up here, what does this mean for you, the viewer? Well, I'm hoping that this gives you just an idea of how to approach art that will allow you to be more ready to understand what may be a conceptual piece or conceptual art in general. And that's the thing. I think a lot of contemporary art is more conceptually driven to a degree. And while I said it is a swinging scale, if we're more prepared for that, we'll be more ready to engage with a piece rather than being immediately turned off by it because it's not to our liking. I think a lot of the reason why we see art that people may view as lacking in aesthetic merit is really because it's more conceptually driven, and thus the goal was to evoke sort of a particular idea in lieu of what you would naturally expect aesthetically. That's another thing I think is really important as viewers to keep in mind. If we're seeing art that seems very unappealing on the surface like that, perhaps we're looking at conceptual art, and so that means perhaps we need to consider some of these ideas in order to help us understand that artistic intent that's going on there. Conceptual art is very, very much focused on artistic intent. I think of all different sort of genre or style, if you will, which I don't care for those sort of words, but I think that makes sense. Maybe more like the school of thought that is conceptual art. Remember that the artist's intent is to share the ideas, so it's very, very intent focused. This is a very intent focused type of art making. So also just something to really keep in mind. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this has been enjoyable, and I hope this just gives you some extra tools for finding conceptual art, understanding it, and just approaching it in maybe a new way. Please share, and until the next one, bye everybody.